It had been another long day at work, but I didn't mind. Coming home to my wife, Emily, made it all worth it. Our house in the suburbs was our haven, a cozy place where laughter echoed in the halls and love felt tangible. Emily had always been the kind of woman who lit up a room with her charm, her laughter infectious, and her presence magnetic. I was lucky to have her, at least that's what I always thought. We'd been married for 7 years, and though life had its ups and downs, I believed we were stronger than most. Emily was a marketing director for a prominent company, and her career often demanded long hours. I didn't mind her ambition, I admired it. In return, I poured myself into my own work at an engineering firm, ensuring we had a stable foundation. Lately, though, something felt off. Emily had been more distant, preoccupied even. She spent more time on her phone, her laughter softer when she scrolled through her messages. When I asked, she'd shrug it off, blaming work stress or a particularly demanding project. It wasn't until her boss, Richard, came up in conversation more frequently that my unease started to grow. Richard was a name I'd heard in passing before. A man in his late 40s, he was charismatic and successful, someone Emily clearly respected. She spoke of him often, more than she did her other colleagues. I told myself it was normal. After all, he was her boss, and their projects required collaboration. But the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. One evening, Emily came home late. She looked radiant in a way that made me pause. Her hair was perfectly styled, her lipstick fresh, and her outfit too polished for a day at the office. "You look amazing," I said, smiling as I approached her in the kitchen. "Thanks," she replied, her tone breezy. "Richard took the team out for drinks to celebrate wrapping up the campaign." I frowned. "You didn't mention there was a celebration tonight." "It was last minute," she said, avoiding my gaze as she poured herself a glass of wine. I tried to push the thought from my mind, chalking it up to my paranoia. Emily wasn't the type to stray. We had trust, or so I believed. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, glowing with a happiness that didn't feel like it was meant for me. The unease lingered like a shadow, ever present and impossible to ignore. Emily's late nights became more frequent, and her excuses grew less convincing. I tried to rationalize it away, telling myself I was being paranoid. She was my wife, the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with. Trust was the cornerstone of our marriage, wasn't it? But the little things started to pile up. She began dressing differently for work. Her usual business casual wardrobe gave way to fitted dresses, higher heels, and more makeup than I'd ever seen her wear before. When I commented on it one morning, she smiled coyly. "I'm just trying to make a good impression," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace in the mirror. "For Richard?" I asked, only half joking. She laughed, but it felt forced. "For everyone. It's a competitive industry." I nodded, but her answer didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her wardrobe that had changed. Emily, who once shared every detail of her day with me, now gave vague responses when I asked about work. "Same old stuff," she'd say, brushing past the question. Her phone was constantly glued to her hand, and she had started taking her calls in the other room, her voice hushed. One evening, after another late night at the office, she came home smelling faintly of a cologne I didn't recognize. "Busy day?" I asked as she kicked off her heels. "Exhausting," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "We had to revise the whole presentation last minute." Her vague answers were starting to feel like a rehearsed script. That night, as she showered, I found myself staring at her phone on the kitchen counter. My heart pounded as I debated whether to look. I resisted. For now. 2 weeks later, our anniversary came around. I had planned a romantic dinner at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated our engagement. I even bought her a bracelet that matched the earrings I'd given her on our wedding day. It was a small gesture, but one I hoped would remind her of how far we'd come. But when I mentioned the dinner that morning, she hesitated. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," she said, guilt flashing across her face. "There's a big meeting tomorrow, and Richard wants the whole team to stay late tonight to prepare. Can't you skip it?" It's our anniversary, Em, I said, disappointment thick in my voice. She frowned, clearly torn. I wish I could, but this project is really important. Richard's counting on me. I felt the sting of her words. She hadn't even apologized. That evening, I sat alone at the restaurant, pushing my food around the plate as couples around me laughed and toasted. I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, that her career was just demanding. But as the hours passed and she didn't even text, the doubts clawed their way to the surface. When she finally came home, it was past midnight. She smelled faintly of wine, and her cheeks were flushed. You could have at least called, I said, my voice low. I'm sorry, she said, setting her purse down. Things ran later than I expected. Did you even think about me tonight? I asked, unable to hide the hurt. She froze, her expression unreadable. Of course I did, she said after a pause. But you know how demanding work can be. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman standing in front of me was still the same person I'd fallen in love with. But something inside me had shifted. The trust that once felt so unshakable now seemed fragile, cracking under the weight of her growing distance. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played for a fool. Her excuses didn't add up, and my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I thought about hiring a private investigator but decided against it. If there was something to uncover, I wanted to find out myself. The opportunity came one evening when she left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. Then I saw it, her email inbox, with a flagged message from Richard. I clicked it. The subject line read, "Last night was incredible." My stomach dropped as I scanned the message. Richard had written about how much he'd enjoyed their private brainstorming session, and how he couldn't wait for the next one. The tone was intimate, far beyond what a professional email should contain. I felt a cold rage build in my chest as I closed the laptop. I'd always trusted Emily, but now, that trust was hanging by a thread. Something was going on, and I was going to find out exactly what. The family dinner had been Emily's idea, a rare gathering to celebrate the news she had been hinting at for weeks. Her excitement was palpable as she flitted around the dining room, setting the table with her mother's best china. Her enthusiasm almost seemed genuine, and for a moment, I wondered if I had misjudged her. Maybe I'd let my suspicions get the better of me. My parents were seated at one end of the table, happily chatting with Emily's sister, Chloe, and her husband. The kids were at the smaller table nearby, already giggling over some inside joke. It should have been a perfect evening. But as I watched Emily, something about her radiant smile set my teeth on edge. She raised her glass as everyone settled in. I just want to say how grateful I am to have all of you here tonight. Family means everything to me, and I'm so excited to share some amazing news. I shifted in my seat, trying to ignore the unease gnawing at my stomach. Whatever Emily was about to announce, I wasn't prepared for it. I'm pregnant, she declared, her face lighting up with joy. The room erupted in congratulations. My mother clapped her hands together in delight, and Chloe rushed over to hug her sister. Meanwhile, I sat frozen, my mind racing. Pregnant? We hadn't even been trying. The last time we'd been intimate was weeks ago, and even then, something had felt off. But her excitement seemed so genuine, so unshakably real, that I forced myself to smile and join in the celebration. This is incredible, Em, I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. I'm going to be a dad again. She beamed at me, her green eyes sparkling. For a moment, I let myself believe it. Maybe this was the fresh start we needed, the glue that would hold us together after the rough patches we'd been navigating. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. Emily had fallen asleep almost instantly, her hands resting on her stomach in a gesture that might have been instinctual. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last few months over and over. Something didn't add up. The next morning, I made an excuse to leave the house early. My first stop was the clinic downtown, where I scheduled a prenatal DNA test. I knew Emily wouldn't like the idea, but I framed it as wanting to be proactive about the baby's health. The nurse assured me it was a routine procedure, something lots of expectant parents did. When I brought it up to Emily that evening, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "A DNA test?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch. "Why would you even suggest something like that?" "It's not about doubt," I said, trying to sound calm. "It's just to make sure everything's fine with the baby." "Don't you want to be sure?" She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "I don't think that's necessary. We're healthy, and the doctor hasn't mentioned anything to be concerned about. It's just a precaution," I insisted. "It's not a big deal." "It feels like a big deal," she snapped. "Do you think I'd lie to you about something like this?" Her defensiveness only made my suspicions grow. "I never said that," I replied, keeping my voice even. "But if there's nothing to hide, why does it bother you so much?" Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she were searching for the right words. Finally, she threw up her hands. "Fine. If it'll make you happy, do the stupid test. But I think it's ridiculous." Her reaction left me uneasy, but I didn't push further. The wheels were already in motion. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope, the words on the page blurring together as I scanned the text. My heart sank when I reached the conclusion. The baby wasn't mine. I sat there, numb, staring at the cold, clinical confirmation of what I had feared all along. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, the weight of it crushing. Emily, my wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, had been unfaithful. And now she was carrying another man's child. That evening I confronted her. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when I placed the test results on the counter. "What's this?" she asked, glancing down. Her face paled as she read the paper, her knife clattering to the cutting board. "You tell me," I said, my voice cold. "Because according to this, the baby isn't mine." Her eyes darted to mine, wide with panic. "I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me by lying. Just tell me the truth." Tears welled in her eyes as she took a step back, her shoulders sagging. It's Richard's." The name hit me like a slap. I felt my chest tighten, anger and betrayal surging in equal measure. "Your boss?" I hissed. "You've been screwing your boss?" "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice trembling. "It just happened." "Don't you dare!" I roared, slamming my fist on the counter. "Don't you dare try to make this sound like some kind of accident." Emily dissolved into sobs, but I felt no sympathy. She had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable, and now she was standing there, expecting me to forgive her. "I want you out," I said, my voice cold and final. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Emily sat at the dining table, her face streaked with tears as she pleaded with me. "Please, Adam, can't we at least talk about this? I made a mistake, but we can work through it." Her words rang hollow, each syllable grating against the fury burning inside me. "Work through it?" I scoffed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You cheated on me, Emily. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed everything we've built." "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "It was just... I don't know, Adam. Things between us haven't been the same for a long time, and Richard, he made me feel wanted." Her excuse only fueled my anger. "Oh, so it's my fault now?" I snapped, glaring at her. "I wasn't good enough, so you turned to your boss? That's your justification?" Her lip quivered as she tried to hold herself together. "I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying... I was lonely." "Lonely?" I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. "Lonely, while I worked my ass off to give us a good life? While I made sure you had everything you ever wanted? That kind of lonely?" She couldn't meet my gaze. Her silence said more than any words ever could. That night, Emily slept in the guest room, or at least she stayed there. Sleep didn't come for me. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with memories of our life together, all now tainted by her betrayal. The laughter we'd shared, the plans we'd made, the future I thought we were building, it all felt like a cruel joke. By morning, the fury had simmered into a cold, calculated resolve. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. She'd shattered my life, and now it was my turn to return the favor. I started small, subtle. Over the next few days I watched her, waiting for her to slip up. She walked around the house like a ghost, trying to engage me in conversation, but I ignored her. My silence was my first weapon, and it cut deeper than any argument ever could. I began spending more time with her sister, Lily. Lily had always been the black sheep of the family, fiery, unpredictable, and frankly gorgeous. Emily had always been jealous of her, though she'd never admitted it outright. Now, that jealousy became my tool. One afternoon, while Emily was out, I texted Lily. "Want to grab coffee and catch up?" Her response was immediate. "Sure. What's going on?" We met at a cozy cafe on the edge of town. Lily was as vibrant as ever, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her smile sharp and knowing. "So, what's the deal?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "You're not exactly the coffee date type." I hesitated, trying to play my cards right. "Things with Emily are complicated." Her eyebrows shot up. "Complicated how?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "She's been unfaithful." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked. "Emily? Seriously?" I nodded, my jaw tightening. "Her boss. She's pregnant, and the baby isn't mine." Lily let out a low whistle, shaking her head. "Wow. That's low even for her." Her bluntness surprised me, but it was oddly comforting. "You're not defending her?" "Why would I?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Emily's always been selfish. I love her, she's my sister, but let's not pretend she's perfect." Her candor was refreshing, and as we talked, I found myself drawn to her in a way I hadn't expected. She was everything Emily wasn't: honest, direct, and fiercely independent. When I dropped her off at her apartment later, she lingered in the doorway. "If you ever need someone to talk to," she said, her voice soft, "I'm here." "Thanks, Lily," I replied, my voice low. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the air between us crackled with something electric. I forced myself to pull away, nodding before heading back to the car. Back at home, Emily was waiting for me in the living room. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Out," I said curtly, walking past her. "With Lily?" she pressed, her tone sharper now. I stopped in my tracks, turning to face her. "What if I was?" I challenged. "It's not like I owe you an explanation anymore." Her face crumpled, but I felt no pity. She had brought this on herself. Over the next few weeks, I escalated my plan. I made sure to mention Lily in casual conversation, planting seeds of doubt in Emily's mind. I'd leave the house without explanation, only to return hours later with a satisfied smirk. Emily's paranoia grew with each passing day, and it was a small, twisted pleasure to see her unravel. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to go further. Emily's unraveling was slow and deliberate. Each passing day added another crack to her already fragile facade. Her once effortless charm now seemed brittle, her laughter forced, and her gaze darted with unease every time I casually mentioned Lily's name. She tried to mask it, but I knew I was getting to her. One evening, as I sat in the living room scrolling through my phone, Emily approached me cautiously. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy from crying, and her voice was hesitant. "Adam," she began softly. "Can we talk?" I didn't even look up. "About what?" She fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "About us. About everything." I let out a hollow laugh, finally meeting her eyes. "What's there to talk about, Emily? You cheated. You're pregnant with another man's child. What more is there to say?" Her lip quivered, but she held her ground. "I know I hurt you. I know I've ruined things. But I love you, Adam. I still do." Love? I shot back, rising to my feet. You don't get to use that word anymore. You gave that up the moment you slept with him. Her face crumpled, but I felt no sympathy. I brushed past her, heading upstairs to the sanctuary of my office, leaving her sobbing quietly in the living room. The next day, I reached out to Lily again. This time, I invited her over for dinner under the pretense of family support. She hesitated at first but eventually agreed. When Lily arrived, she looked stunning, her hair in loose waves and her fitted black dress emphasizing her curves. Emily's face turned pale the moment Lily stepped inside. The tension was palpable, but I played the perfect host, pouring wine and making small talk as if everything were normal. Dinner was a master class in manipulation. I lavished attention on Lily, laughing at her jokes, complimenting her appearance, and leaning just a little too close whenever I passed her something. Emily sat silently, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. "So, Lily," I said casually, pouring her another glass of wine, "have you thought about taking that job offer in the city?" Lily smiled. "I'm still weighing my options. It's a big decision." "Well, whatever you decide, I'm sure you'll be amazing. You're so driven, so capable," I said, my tone dripping with admiration. Emily slammed her glass down, the sound reverberating through the room. "Excuse me," she muttered, standing abruptly and disappearing into the kitchen. I waited a moment before following her, finding her leaning against the counter, her shoulders shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked innocently, though my tone was laced with sarcasm. She whirled around, her eyes blazing. "What are you doing, Adam?" "What do you mean?" I replied, feigning ignorance. "You know exactly what I mean," she hissed. "Flirting with my sister? Right in front of me?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "Oh, so now you care? Funny how betrayal feels, isn't it?" Her face twisted in pain, but I wasn't done. "This is just the beginning, Emily. You think you can destroy me and walk away unscathed? Think again." After dinner, I walked Lily to her car. She hesitated before getting in, her eyes searching mine. "Adam, are you okay?" she asked softly. "This doesn't seem like you." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Lily. Just trying to figure things out." She nodded, still looking unconvinced. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." As she drove away, I couldn't ignore the pang of guilt that tugged at the edges of my mind. Lily was innocent in all this, but I was using her as a pawn in my twisted game. Still, the satisfaction of seeing Emily squirm outweighed any second thoughts. That night I took it a step further. While Emily was in the shower, I sent Lily a text. "Dinner was great. Thanks for being there for me. I needed it." When Emily came to bed, her damp hair falling around her shoulders, I casually left my phone face up on the nightstand. It didn't take long for the notification to light up the screen. "What's this?" she asked, grabbing the phone before I could react. "Give me that," I said, reaching for it, but she pulled away, her eyes scanning the message. Her face went pale as she looked up at me. "You're texting her now?" I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "She's been more supportive than you have." Her mouth opened and closed, words failing her. Finally, she flung the phone onto the bed and stormed out of the room. I heard the slam of the guest room door moments later. I knew my actions were cruel, but I couldn't stop. Emily had broken something inside me, and now, I was determined to make her feel every ounce of the pain she had inflicted. The morning after Emily stormed out of the bedroom, I woke up to an eerily quiet house. The usual clatter of breakfast being made was absent, and so was Emily. I glanced at the guest room as I passed by. It was empty, the bed still neatly made. A part of me hoped she'd finally packed her things and left, but I doubted she'd make it that easy for me. When I reached the kitchen, there she was, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, her face pale but resolute. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. I grabbed a mug and poured my own coffee before sitting across from her. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she set her cup down. Whatever you're doing with Lily, it needs to stop." I leaned back in my chair, a humorless smile tugging at my lips. Oh, so now you care about boundaries? Her jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. I know I messed up, Adam. I know I hurt you, but dragging my sister into this isn't fair. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting her words hang in the air. Fair? You want to talk about fair, Emily? You lied to me, cheated on me, and got pregnant with another man's child. And now you want to lecture me about what's fair? Her face crumpled, but she quickly regained her composure. You're angry. I get that. But this isn't you. You're not this cruel. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. Over the next week, Emily's behavior shifted. She stopped pleading for forgiveness and instead started pushing back. She spent more time out of the house, claiming she was staying with friends or attending therapy. I didn't bother asking for details. If she was trying to rebuild her life, it was too little, too late. But one evening, she came home earlier than usual, her face flushed with determination. We need to figure out what we're doing, she said as she set her purse down. What we're doing? I repeated, not looking up from my laptop. I thought that was pretty clear. You're staying in the guest room until you decide where to go next. Her fists clenched at her sides. This is my house too, Adam. I'm not going anywhere. I laughed coldly, finally meeting her gaze. Fine. Stay. But don't expect things to go back to the way they were. She stepped closer, her expression hardening. If you think you can use Lily to hurt me, you're wrong. She's smarter than that. And she doesn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. Her words struck a nerve, but I kept my face impassive. Lily's a grown woman. She can make her own decisions. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dangerous in her gaze. And what happens when she finds out you're just using her to get back at me? Do you really think she'll stay on your side? I didn't respond, but her words lingered long after she stormed out of the room. Was I being reckless? Was I pushing too far? The following day, I found myself at Lily's apartment again. She greeted me with a warm smile, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. Is everything okay? She asked as she let me in. I hesitated, the weight of Emily's accusations pressing on my chest. I just needed someone to talk to. We sat on her couch, and as we talked, I felt the familiar pull of her energy, so vibrant and unfiltered compared to Emily's calculated charm. But this time, her questions were more pointed. Adam, she said after a long pause, what's really going on between you and Emily? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's complicated. Her expression softened. I know she's hurt you, but you're not yourself lately. This isn't the Adam I've known all these years. Her words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment I considered telling her everything, the anger, the betrayal, the twisted satisfaction of watching Emily squirm. But instead I deflected. I just need time, I said, forcing a smile. That's all. That evening, Emily confronted me again. This time, her tone was icy, her posture defiant. I talked to Lily, she said, crossing her arms. She's worried about you. I raised an eyebrow, feigning indifference. Is that so? She thinks you're spiraling. Emily continued. And honestly, so do I. This isn't healthy, Adam. For either of us. I laughed, the sound hollow. You don't get to lecture me on what's healthy, Emily. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think you're hurting me, but all you're doing is ruining yourself. Is that really what you want? Her words cut deeper than I cared to admit, but I refused to let her see it. You've already ruined me, Emily. I'm just returning the favor. The silence between Emily and me had grown sharp, like a blade waiting to cut through the facade of civility we pretended to maintain. She stopped crying at night. She stopped trying to reach out, and in her place, a colder, more calculated version of Emily emerged. It seemed we had moved past the heartbreak and into a war of wills. The battlefield? Our home. One morning, as I left for work, I noticed my car parked slightly off-center in the driveway. I paused, my instincts prickling. When I climbed inside, I found the glove compartment open and rummaged through. My registration, some receipts, and a few random trinkets were gone. Nothing important, but the message was clear: Emily was starting to push back. That evening, when I brought it up, she feigned ignorance. "Your car?" she asked, her expression perfectly innocent. Why would I touch it? I stared at her, trying to gauge if she was lying. But Emily had always been a master manipulator, her calm demeanor impenetrable. "If you're trying to mess with me, it's not going to work," I said coldly. She tilted her head, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Why would I need to? You're doing a fine job of unraveling all on your own." Her comment stayed with me. Was I unraveling? My obsession with revenge had consumed me, leaving little room for anything else. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close to breaking her. I doubled down, ignoring her mind games and leaning further into my own. I started inviting Lily over more often. At first, she came reluctantly, sensing the tension between Emily and me. But I played the role of the wounded husband perfectly, painting myself as the victim of Emily's betrayal. "I just need someone to talk to," I told Lily during one of her visits. "Someone I can trust." She placed a comforting hand on mine, her eyes full of empathy. "You don't have to go through this alone, Adam." Her touch lingered a little longer than necessary, and I saw Emily watching from the corner of the room, her jaw tightening as she turned away. It was a small victory, but it felt satisfying nonetheless. But Emily wasn't done yet. A few days later, I came home to find that she had rearranged my office. Papers were stacked haphazardly, my laptop moved, and my private files, ones I'd been using to prepare for a legal separation, had been rifled through. When I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. "I was just cleaning up," she said casually, sipping her wine. "I thought you'd appreciate the effort." I clenched my fists, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. "Don't touch my things." She set her glass down, her eyes glinting with defiance. "Or what, Adam? What are you going to do?" I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. "You don't want to find out." For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then she smiled, a slow, maddening smile. "You're not scaring me, Adam. You never could." The next day, I decided to escalate things further. I called my lawyer and began drafting the paperwork for a divorce. My terms were clear: I wanted the house, and I wanted to expose Emily's infidelity in court. In our state, adultery could still influence property settlements, and I planned to use that to my advantage. That evening I left the draft of the paperwork on the kitchen counter, knowing she'd find it. When I returned from the gym, she was waiting for me, the papers in her hand. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" I shot back. "You cheated, Emily. You destroyed this marriage." Her grip on the papers tightened. "And you think dragging me through court is going to fix that? You're pathetic, Adam." "Maybe," I said, leaning in. "But at least I'm not a liar." Her slap came out of nowhere, the sharp sting shocking me into silence. For a moment, we stared at each other, the room thick with tension. Then she threw the papers on the floor and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I didn't chase her. Instead, I picked up the papers, smoothing out the wrinkles, and placed them back on the counter. This war was far from over. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I found a manila envelope on the front porch. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Pictures of me with Lily, sitting close on the couch, laughing over drinks, and even one where her hand lingered on my arm. The note inside was short and cutting. "Two can play this game." I felt my blood boil. Emily wasn't just fighting back, she was trying to turn my own tactics against me. The envelope of photos was a declaration of war. Emily wasn't backing down, and neither was I. My hands trembled as I flipped through the images, each one a weapon aimed squarely at me. She'd been watching, waiting for her chance to strike, and now she had it. I stuffed the photos back into the envelope and left them on the counter. When I confronted her later that evening, she was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. Nice photos, I said, tossing the envelope onto the coffee table. She didn't even flinch. Oh, those? Just a little insurance. Thought you'd appreciate the effort. I leaned over her, my voice low and menacing. You're playing a dangerous game, Emily. She met my gaze, her lips curling into a smirk. So are you, Adam. That night I couldn't sleep. The air between us had grown suffocating, the tension so thick it felt like the walls of the house were closing in. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument, every accusation. The photos were a problem, sure, but not an insurmountable one. I just needed to stay ahead of her. The next morning I made my move. I called Lily, inviting her out for lunch. I didn't mention the photos or the escalating battle with Emily. Instead, I focused on laying the groundwork for what came next. Lily arrived at the cafe wearing a concerned expression. You sounded tense on the phone, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. It's Emily, I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. She's not handling things well. Lily frowned, her brow furrowing. What's she done now? I hesitated, carefully choosing my words. She's been spying on us. Taking photos, trying to make it look like there's something going on between us. Her face went pale. What? Adam, there's nothing. I know, I said quickly, placing a reassuring hand on hers. It's all part of her plan to make me look bad. She's desperate, Lily. She'll do anything to keep the upper hand. Lily nodded, her jaw tightening. That's low even for her. Yeah, I said, leaning back. But I won't let her drag you into this. That evening, I returned home to find Emily waiting for me in the kitchen. She was dressed impeccably, her makeup flawless, and her expression unreadable. It was a look I recognized, a calculated effort to maintain control. Lily called me, she said, crossing her arms. She told me what you said about the photos. I shrugged, pretending not to care. And you're pathetic, Adam, she spat. You're spinning lies to make me look like the villain, but everyone knows the truth. Do they? I shot back, stepping closer. Because as far as I can tell, you're the one carrying another man's child. Her face twisted with rage, but I didn't stop. You think you can turn Lily against me? Go ahead and try. She's not blind, Emily. She sees you for who you really are. Her hand lashed out before I could react, the slap echoing through the kitchen. My cheek stung, but I didn't flinch. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch until she broke. I hate you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Good, I said coldly. Because I stopped loving you the moment you lied to me. The next few days were a blur of tension and maneuvering. Emily escalated her attacks, dropping hints to family and friends about my behavior, and planting seeds of doubt wherever she could. I retaliated by digging into her finances, uncovering purchases and transactions that painted a damning picture of her affair. But the worst came when I received a call from Lily. Adam, she said, her voice shaking. Emily showed me some texts. Between us. What texts? I asked, my heart sinking. Fake ones, she said quickly. But they look real. She's trying to make it seem like we've been having an affair. My blood ran cold. Emily was playing her ace, and it was devastating. If she could convince Lily, or worse, anyone else, that I'd crossed that line, my credibility would be shattered. Don't believe her, I said firmly. She's trying to manipulate you. I know, Lily replied. But it's getting messy, Adam. I'm not sure I can keep being in the middle of this. That evening, I confronted Emily. She was in the living room, flipping through a magazine like she didn't have a care in the world. You've gone too far, I said, tossing the printed screenshots of the fake texts onto the coffee table. She glanced at them, her expression infuriatingly calm. Oh, those? Just a little insurance. Lily knows they're fake, I said, my voice rising. And so will everyone else when I show them the originals. Her smirk faltered, but only slightly. Go ahead, Adam. Show them. Let's see who they believe, The man who's spiraling out of control, or the pregnant wife trying to hold her life together? Her words hit harder than I expected, but I didn't let her see it. You're going to regret this, I said through clenched teeth. She leaned back, crossing her legs with a smug smile. No, Adam. You're the one who's going to regret underestimating me. The house had become a war zone, the tension so thick it felt like I was breathing in smoke. Every interaction with Emily was a battle, every word a weapon. We were no longer two people in a crumbling marriage, we were enemies in an all-out war. The day after our last confrontation, I received a call from my lawyer. She's filed for divorce, he said, his voice neutral, citing emotional abuse and infidelity. I laughed bitterly. Infidelity? She's the one pregnant with another man's child. She's using those fake texts, he explained. The ones with her sister. She's painting a picture of you as manipulative and unfaithful. My stomach turned. Emily wasn't just fighting back, she was trying to destroy me. What are my options? I asked, my voice tight. We'll counter with the evidence of her affair, the lawyer replied. But this is going to get ugly, Adam. Be prepared. Ugly didn't begin to cover it. That evening, Emily was waiting for me when I got home. She was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, a triumphant gleam in her eye. I spoke to Lily, she said, her tone sweet but laced with malice. She's distancing herself from you, isn't she? I clenched my jaw. What are you trying to prove, Emily? Her smile widened. That you're not as clever as you think. You thought you could humiliate me, use my sister against me, but it looks like your little plan is falling apart. I stepped closer, the rage boiling just beneath my skin. You're playing with fire. She didn't back down. And you're out of matches. The next week was a blur of escalating chaos. Emily spread her narrative far and wide, painting me as the villain in our marital implosion. Friends, family, even coworkers started looking at me differently, their sympathetic smiles tinged with judgment. But I had my own arsenal. I handed over everything I had to my lawyer, records of her late-night texts and calls to Richard, receipts from their hotel rendezvous, and the results of the paternity test. It was enough to counter her lies, but it didn't make the battle any less grueling. Emily, of course, retaliated in kind. She filed for exclusive use of the house, claiming she needed a stable environment for her pregnancy. When I came home one evening to find the locks changed, I wasn't even surprised. I pounded on the door, my anger spilling over. Emily! Open the damn door! She appeared at the window, her expression cold. You're not welcome here anymore, Adam. You can take it up with the court. Don't think this is over, I shouted, my fists clenched. You won't win. But as I stormed away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already losing. With nowhere else to go, I found myself at Lily's apartment. She opened the door, her expression a mix of sympathy and hesitation. I can't believe she locked you out, she said, letting me in. That's low even for her. Low is all she knows, I replied bitterly, sinking onto her couch. Lily hesitated before sitting beside me. Adam, I don't know how to say this, but I can't keep getting dragged into this. I turned to her, my heart sinking. What are you saying? She looked down at her hands, her voice soft. Emily's my sister. I don't agree with what she's done, but I can't take sides anymore. It's tearing me apart. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I nodded, forcing a tight smile. I understand. I'm sorry, she said, reaching for my hand. I really am. That night, I sat alone in a motel room, staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything pressed down on me, the lies, the betrayal, the relentless battle for control. Emily had taken so much from me, and yet I couldn't stop the cycle. I was just as consumed by the need to win as she was. But at what cost? The next morning, I called my lawyer. I want to settle, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. He paused, surprised. Are you sure? We have a strong case. I'm done fighting, I interrupted. Let her have the house. I'll take the car and whatever's left in the savings. I just want out. That evening, I met Emily at the lawyer's office to go over the terms of the settlement. She looked smug, confident that she'd won. "You must be relieved," she said as we signed the papers. "To finally be free of me." I met her gaze, my expression blank. "You were never the prison, Emily. Just a mistake." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Keep telling yourself that." As I walked out of the office, a strange sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The war was over, but the scars it left behind would take a lifetime to heal. The war between Emily and me was over, but the ruins of what we'd destroyed together remained. Every victory in the battle had come at a price, and now we both stood among the ashes of a marriage that had once seemed unshakable. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with dated fixtures and thin walls, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I didn't have to tiptoe around someone else's feelings or brace myself for the next fight. The silence was a strange comfort, though it often felt too loud in the quiet hours of the night. Emily stayed in the house, her pregnancy progressing as she prepared for the arrival of a child that wasn't mine. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard snippets about her life. Richard had distanced himself, apparently unwilling to leave his own wife for the woman carrying his child. Emily was on her own, and while part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, another part felt nothing at all. Lily, true to her word, stepped away from the conflict entirely. We hadn't spoken since the settlement was finalized, and though I missed her, I couldn't blame her for wanting to protect herself from the chaos I'd dragged her into. She was better off without me. A few months later, I received a call from my lawyer. "The divorce is officially finalized," he said. "You're free, Adam." Free. The word hung in the air long after the call ended. I wasn't sure what freedom felt like anymore. For so long, my life had revolved around Emily, loving her, resenting her, fighting her. Without her, there was a hollow space where my anger used to live. To fill the void, I threw myself into work. Long hours at the office helped keep my mind occupied, and I started reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted away from during my marriage. Slowly, I began to rediscover who I was outside of being Emily's husband. One day, while running errands, I spotted Emily at a coffee shop. She was sitting alone, her baby bump visible beneath a loose dress. She looked tired, her once polished appearance now frayed at the edges. For a moment I considered approaching her, but I stopped myself. What was there to say? As I turned to leave, she looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened, and for a brief second, our gazes locked. Then she gave me a small, sad smile, the kind that spoke of things left unsaid. I nodded in acknowledgement, and walked away. Months passed, and the finality of everything began to sink in. Emily gave birth to a baby girl, a fact I learned through social media rather than direct contact. Her announcement post was filled with comments from supportive friends, but the conspicuous absence of Richard's name told me everything I needed to know. I, too, started to move on. I met someone, a co-worker named Rachel who joined our firm recently. She was kind and steady, a stark contrast to the whirlwind that had been my marriage. We took things slow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of suspicion or anger. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on my couch watching a movie, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakably from Emily. "I know we're done, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. In the end, I didn't. There was nothing left to say. Looking back, I'm not sure when it all went wrong. Maybe it was a series of small fractures that slowly broke us apart. Or maybe we were doomed from the start. Either way, the result was the same. Two people who'd once loved each other reduced to strangers, scarred by a war neither of us really won. But life moves forward, and so did I. The scars are still there, faint reminders of a time when everything fell apart. But they no longer define me. They're just part of my story, a story that, for better or worse, I survived. And so, that's where it ends. Not with a dramatic confrontation or a sweeping resolution, but with a quiet acceptance of what was and what will never be again. A chapter closed, a new one beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that.